All right, guys. So the other day we talked about how Trump launched the Board of Peace, I believe he called it, and it was incredibly dystopian. I mean, Jared Kushner did a presentation where he was basically showing, like, here's what we're going to do to Gaza. It was this futuristic tech AI billionaire city built on the skulls of dead Palestinian babies, and they were acting like it was some amazing thing. Meanwhile, all I'm seeing is the Fourth Reich. This just looks like the Fourth Reich to me. It's so crazy that they're saying these things out loud. Like, oh yeah, we're gonna do crypto things on top of where this hospital used to be. Like, what the fuck? So, but the Board of Peace is about more than just Gaza. It is basically Trump's attempt to destroy the UN and create a new UN where he's the emperor of the world. So here is Ben Norton of Geopolitical Economy Report, and he's going to break this down perfectly for us. Take a look.
The United States is waging a political war against all international multilateral organizations that the U.S. cannot fully control. The U.S. government is getting increasingly desperate because everyone can see that the power of the U.S. empire has been in significant decline. And the U.S. government wants to drag the world back to the unipolar era in the 1990s and early 2000s, when the U.S. was the only major superpower on Earth and no country was powerful enough to challenge its global domination. And all U.S. administrations have been imperialist and have waged wars around the world and overthrown and destabilized foreign governments. But Donald Trump has ushered in a new era of hyper-imperialism at a new extreme level. And the U.S. government is openly attacking international law itself. And again, all U.S. administrations have been deeply hypocritical and have violated international law, but usually they at least pretend to care about international law and do lip service. Again, it's superficial and hypocritical, but Trump is not even doing that anymore. He's explicitly saying the U.S. government does not care about international law and wants to replace international law with the law of the jungle, might makes right, in which the U.S. government can do whatever it wants anywhere in the world. In an interview with the New York Times in January, Donald Trump was asked about his plans to try to colonize Canada and Greenland and Venezuela. And he said, quote, "I don't need international law," end quote. And Trump was asked if there were any limits to his power. And he said, quote, "My own morality, my own mind. It's the only thing that can stop me."
It's so crazy that he does so much fucked up shit on a daily basis. And there's so many scandals that this didn't even, I don't even know if this made it on CNN or MSNBC or was like a big point of discussion. But this is genuinely one of the most terrifying things I've ever heard a president say. And this alone is like totally impeachable. This is so crazy. There's nothing that constrains you except yourself. That's literally the, like, I'm above the law comment. You know, when the president does it, it's not illegal. That's that again, all over again. But now it's just another day that ends in Y. The fact that there's zero Republicans that have found a fucking spine to stand up to this, to fucking say, you know what? Okay, it's enough. This guy, it's time to go.
And after saying that in January, Trump posted on his social media website, Truth Social, an image, a photoshopped image of him in the White House lecturing European leaders from NATO, European vassals of the US empire. And next to Trump, there is a photoshopped image of a map showing the US colonizing not only Greenland, but also Canada and Venezuela.
But what's so ironic about this, though, is it's literally this kind of stuff that makes everybody go, let's not work with them anymore, the U.S. Let's work with China now. It's stuff like this that has the exact opposite of the intended effect. And to not see that, to not understand that, to not get, like, they act like you actually don't need relationships around the world, that you could just boss them around because we're the U.S., we have the big military, we have the big guns, therefore we just boss everybody. Like, really, you think that works in perpetuity? That in the long run, it'll just work out if you just bully everybody into submitting to you? Like, you think that's the intelligent way to go about this? And apparently he does. And he posts shit like this all the time. Humiliates world leaders, fucking rips up deals with them. Like, you are begging for them to abandon the dollar and abandon the U.S., and they're going to do that.
Trump is making it clear that the U.S. empire does not care about international law. Again, that's not new, but saying it very explicitly. And he's even going a step further and saying that he's going to physically expand the territory of the U.S. empire by colonizing foreign countries and directly attacking the fundamental concept of sovereignty. And this is why the Donald Trump administration has been withdrawing from most of the world's multilateral institutions. In January, the White House published a memo announcing that it had withdrawn the U.S. from more than 60 international organizations, conventions, and treaties, which it said are contrary to the interests of the United States, meaning that the U.S. cannot completely control it. And this memo included a long list of the more than 60 international organizations that the US government is withdrawing from. Many of them have to do with international development and immigration and human rights and energy and climate change. And about half of them are United Nations organizations. So the Trump administration is withdrawing from the UN International Law Commission and many other UN organizations. Now, the US has not officially withdrawn from the United Nations itself, but it's very possible that the next step is for the US to totally withdraw from the United Nations. In 2025, the Trump administration already withdrew the US from UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. And last year, Trump also withdrew the United States from the World Health Organization, the WHO, which shows how completely isolated the US is on the global stage. It's a pariah state. It's a complete rogue regime. And while the US is withdrawing from all of these UN organizations and other multilateral institutions, Donald Trump is trying to create a whole new infrastructure, international infrastructure, that is entirely controlled by the United States.
Entirely controlled by him. And Board of Peace, by the way, it's like the most Orwellian thing I've ever heard in my life. It is just so, it's classic Trump too. Name it something that sounds above reproach, but have the reality of it be disgusting.
That tries to impose US unipolar hegemony on the world. And the perfect example of this is the so-called Board of Peace that Trump announced during the World Economic Forum in Davos in January. It is completely obvious what Trump is trying to do with this. He's trying to create an alternative to the United Nations, a competitor to the UN that only the US controls, that only the US has veto power in, no other country on earth. In fact, the US government is so shameless that the Trump administration created a logo for the so-called Board of Peace that is directly modeled after the UN logo, but the UN logo includes all of the world, all of the planet, all of the continents, and yet the so-called Board of Peace logo, led by the US, only shows North America and a small part of South America. So symbolically, it's so clear what the US empire is trying to do. They're trying to replace the United Nations, which again, despite all of the problems with the UN, it is still multilateral and international. The US has disproportionate influence in the UN. The US has veto power in the UN Security Council. But that's not enough for the US government. Washington wants to control everything. For Washington, it's not enough to have veto power. It's not enough to control 51%. It wants 100%. Trump wants to make sure that no other country on earth can ever challenge the US empire in any way. And I don't often agree with the British newspaper The Guardian, but it was absolutely right when it published an article titled "Trump's Board of Peace is an imperial court completely unlike what was proposed." And that is true, because the way that Trump is trying to justify the creation of this alternative to the UN, the so-called Board of Peace, is that technically, in a very small way on paper, it was justified by a UN Security Council resolution that was passed in 2025. But actually, that Security Council resolution was supposed to be about Gaza. There was supposed to be a UN-mandated body, an international body created in order to administer Gaza after the US and Israel completely destroyed it. But this so-called Board of Peace that Trump has actually announced has nothing to do with Gaza. In fact, the Trump administration published a charter for the so-called Board of Peace, and it doesn't even mention Gaza. So the US government was simply using that UN Security Council resolution as an excuse to try to destroy the United Nations. It's absolutely incredible. And when the Trump administration announced the members of the executive board of the so-called Board of Peace, it's even crazier when you see who they are. The majority of them are U.S. government officials, including U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff, and Trump's advisor Robert Gabriel, who is the U.S. Deputy National Security Advisor, along with Trump's advisor Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, and then you also have Tony Blair, the war criminal, the former Prime Minister of the UK, who helped George W. Bush invade Iraq in an illegal war of aggression. And then you also have as a member the billionaire oligarch Mark Rowan, who is a close friend of Trump. He's the CEO of the Wall Street financial firm Apollo Global Management that is very deeply invested in private equity. And this billionaire oligarch has been working closely with Trump to try to take over universities in the US and to use them to spread right-wing propaganda. So he's on the executive board of the so-called Board of Peace. And then finally, you have Ajay Banga, who is the president of the World Bank, an organization that the US also has veto power in. So this organization is a complete joke. It is a brazen attempt by the US government to replace the United Nations with an organization that only Washington controls. And this is why very few countries have actually accepted the US invitation to join the so-called Board of Peace. You have the right-wing US puppet regime of Javier Milei in Argentina, and then you also have US allies like Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan, and it's likely that the leaders of these countries only joined because they're trying to curry favor with Donald Trump and get more support from the US government. And you also have Turkey, which is a member of NATO and is constantly playing both sides, east against west. But none of the major global powers have accepted the invitation to join Trump's UN alternative. China and India, the two most populous countries on earth, have not accepted to join, and Russia has also not accepted the invitation to join. And by the way, what's crazy is that Donald Trump did not even invite any countries in sub-Saharan Africa. Bloomberg compiled a list of the countries invited to join this so-called Board of Peace, and you can see that no African country south of Egypt was invited to join, which is absolutely crazy. Africa is a continent with 1.5 billion people, and by the end of this century, there will be 2 billion people in Africa, and yet the US government has no interest in sub-Saharan Africa except for the minerals it can exploit. And let's not forget that during his first term, Trump demonized African nations as S-hole countries. I mean, this is the extreme arrogance of the US empire. But again, the main point that I'm stressing here is that if you look at a map of the countries invited to join Trump's so-called Board of Peace, the vast majority did not accept the invitation. This once again shows how isolated the US regime is on the international stage. It's a complete rogue state. And the Chinese government has in fact publicly come out and criticized Trump's attempt to replace the UN with the so-called Board of Peace. China rejected Trump's invitation. And a spokesman from China's foreign ministry said very clearly that China firmly upholds the UN-centered international system, the international order based on international law, and the principles of the UN Charter.
I love this because it really blows up the preposterous notion that, oh, the Western nations believe in international law and freedom and justice and equality and the Enlightenment and all of these things, and that's where civilization comes from. And then meanwhile, it's the U.S. that is blowing up the entire U.S. with Israel, by the way, that blew up the entire international law system. And here you have China basically stepping up and saying, no, we believe in the international law system, not Trump's new idea of might makes right, law of the jungle, U.S. decides everything. He's the global emperor.
Which is based fundamentally on sovereignty, the respect for sovereignty and non-interference in countries' internal affairs. This is what China is upholding, the UN-centered system of international law, not the Western so-called rules-based order in which the West makes the rules. That was already bad enough. Or Trump, what he's trying to propose is even worse than that, which is rule by one country arbitrarily, where the US can do whatever it wants at any time. And by the way, that is exactly what Donald Trump has in mind with his so-called Board of Peace. Bloomberg published an article revealing how Trump is trying to force countries to pay $1 billion to stay on this board that only the U.S. controls.
Which, by the way, I just want to be clear about that. He's stealing that money. So he created this Board of Peace, this new UN, where he's global emperor, and he's on it forever, right? And he's asking for $1 billion for every country that joins. He's taking that money. In the same way that he overthrew Maduro in Venezuela, and he stole the oil, and he's put hundreds of millions of dollars in the oil money in a private bank account in Qatar. So that's now his money. He's personally stealing the oil from Venezuela. Yes, that's how corrupt this man is. This is who we're dealing with. This is who we're dealing with. It is legendary. It is perhaps the most corrupt, selfish, narcissistic man that has ever existed.
According to the charter that the Trump administration created for this US-controlled organization, Trump will be the lifelong inaugural chairman of the so-called Board of Peace. Trump and the US government will decide who is invited to this organization, and all decisions made are subject to the approval of the US president, of Trump and whoever would succeed him. And any country that wants permanent membership on the so-called Board of Peace will have to pay at least $1 billion to Trump and the US, money that they will control. Moreover, the US president will decide when the Board of Peace convenes its meetings, and the US president controls the agenda that will be discussed at those meetings. And finally, Trump will have the power to remove any members of this organization. The US government can kick out any country if it doesn't like it. which is exactly what happened just a few days after Trump announced this organization. Trump had previously invited Canada, and Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney accepted the invitation, and then Trump withdrew the invitation in protest because Trump was furious about Mark Carney's trip to China. Carney was the first Canadian prime minister to visit China since 2017, in nearly a decade. And there he met with China's president Xi Jinping, and they signed an agreement to deepen trade. And Canada agreed to lift tariffs that it had previously put on Chinese electric vehicles at the pressure of the US government, because US car companies are unable to compete with Chinese auto companies. They're terrified, and they were begging the US government and Canada to put very high tariffs on these Chinese EVs. Well, now Mark Carney has lifted those tariffs, which is going to devastate US car corporations that can't compete with Chinese firms. So in response, what did Donald Trump do? He withdrew the invitation for Canada on his so-called Board of Peace. And then Trump threatened 100% tariffs on Canada, one of the top 3 US trading partners, blackmailing Canada to pressure it not to make a trade deal with China. Again, this is how the US empire treats its so-called allies. This is why so many countries like Canada and European countries are looking for alternatives to this insanity of the rogue regime in Washington that truly thinks that it is the global dictator, that the United States is the emperor of planet Earth, and the US can do whatever it wants at any time, and there are no limits on its global power.
And then, by the way, Trump came out and said that Mark Carney backed off of his agreement with China. But Mark Carney came out and said, that's not true. Like, I'm not backing off of our deals with China. So this is where we're at now. That Trump is alienating and isolating the U.S. from the world, throwing tantrums, breaking up deals, launching trade wars, destroying our relationships across the board, making people run into the loving arms of China. And then when he issues a threat now, the other countries don't back down. And he goes, oh, they back down. Like, literally Mad King level shit. This is Mad King level shit.
And this is why the US government is waging a full frontal assault on international law. Because again, as I've been discussing, international law was always very deeply hypocritical, but it's the only thing that small countries in the global south have to defend themselves. Despite all of the problems with it, many countries in the global south still defend the United Nations and the UN Charter, which is based, again, on the sacred principle of sovereignty. And they recognize that if this system does not exist despite its many flaws, then the only thing that does exist is the law of the jungle. Might makes right. The US empire thinks it can do whatever it wants anywhere in the world with no consequences. And by the way, this is why China has always steadfastly defended the international law-based system centered in the United Nations. And this is not just under Trump. I'm reading here a statement from 2024, back when Joe Biden was president. And the Biden administration was trying to replace the international law-based order with this vague concept of the so-called international rules-based order, of course, in which the West makes the rules. The US in particular makes the rules and orders everyone around. And the Biden administration was accusing Beijing of supposedly violating this vague idea of the so-called rules-based order.
Well, that's so rich because we were arming and funding a genocide. And you're going to accuse China of, you're not following the rules, sir. You just gave Israel a gazillion more dollars to blow up 80,000 more babies. And really? This is what you're going to say to us?
And China, for its part, has been very adamant in defending what it calls the UN-centered international system. Back in 2024, China celebrated the 79th anniversary of the founding of the United Nations. And a Chinese foreign ministry spokesperson said, quote, China will continue to work with the rest of the world to practice true multilateralism and defend the UN-centered international system and the international order based on international law, end quote. And this is why China is also an important member of the Group of Friends in Defense of the Charter of the United Nations, which brings together global South countries trying to defend the sacred principle of sovereignty, which is enshrined in the UN Charter. Sovereignty and non-interference. The UN Charter clearly establishes that according to international law, countries should have their sovereignty respected and they have the right to non-interference, that other powers should not meddle in their internal affairs. This is why China and other countries in the global south may have many criticisms of the existing international law-based order and with the United Nations, which again is still largely dominated by Western countries. Yet despite their criticisms, they don't want to replace it. They don't want to get rid of it because they know that the alternative would probably be even worse. And this is exactly what the United States is trying to do. It's trying to replace that international law-based system with its own order that only the United States controls. This is why the US government is waging war against international law. This is why the Trump administration has withdrawn from more than 60 international organizations, including UN bodies. The goal of the US empire is to forcibly drag the world back into the unipolar era when the US is the only dominant power and US corporations can exploit every country. Workers all around the world can exploit their natural resources. There are no competitors to US corporate monopolies in Silicon Valley and to large financial firms like BlackRock on Wall Street. The goal of the US regime is to impose a global imperialist dictatorship. And this is not necessarily new with Trump, but he has taken it to a whole new extreme level. He has taken the mask off the US empire and showed its true ugly face to the entire world, and no one can any longer deny its true intentions.
I mean, he's exactly right. And the terrifying thing is, I didn't think it would ever be possible to miss the days where we were massive hypocrites but still acting under the assumptions and the premises of the framework of international law. I didn't think it'd be possible to miss those days where you didn't question the framework, but you said, hey, look, we're not living up to this. We're violating this in this way and that way and this way. I mean, look at what we're doing in Iraq. That's an illegal and offensive war against a country that didn't attack us. That's not right. We're not allowed to do that, so on and so forth, right? But then it went from that to, the genocide in Gaza. And then it became, we're blowing up random fishing boats in the Caribbean. We're illegally abducting the sovereign leader of Venezuela. We're threatening to steal Greenland. We're bombing Yemen and Somalia and Iran. We're giving more money and more weapons to Israel. We do a fake peace agreement and ceasefire with Gaza, then turn around and watch Israel continue to destroy Gaza on a daily basis and act like it's not happening. And we finally got to the point where the hypocrisy was too much. The violations were too much. And now Trump is just going, fuck it. Let's stop playing around from now on. And let's just say, we're pulling out of the U.S. Fuck it. There is no more international law. We're not even going to pretend there's international law. I created this thing called the Board of Peace. I'm the emperor. I decide everything. Might makes right. But what's so crazy is, I don't think they realize there is no going backwards. That's not a thing. Trump is trying to make us go backwards to let's go pre United Nations, pre-League of Nations. And might makes right is great because we're the most powerful right now. We have the biggest military, so let's do that. But people are not going to go backwards. They're not. The other countries are not going to go backwards. They're going to go forward. And so Trump is going to try to do this, and he's going to fail. And he's only going to speed up the collapse of the dollar, the abandonment of the dollar as the world reserve currency. He's only going to further alienate us and isolate us from the rest of our allies even. He's going to make them run into the loving arms of China. He's going to leave us in a place where we're just screwed on every level. You don't have allies. You're waging multiple stupid fucking wars, and the economy's collapsing. It's going to be like 7 different crises all happening at once. And it's all going to be because he was too aggressive, too brutal, too vicious, and too self-interested, too corrupt, and too naked with his rank imperialism and colonialism. Like, it's so funny that these people are genuinely too stupid to even see the logic behind soft power, right? The logic behind the international framework that everybody agreed to and using that as the launching point. To not realize that is just, I don't know, I maybe I'm naive, but I didn't think anybody could be stupid enough to not see those things, but we're there. And that's what Trump is. Trump is just a total fucking wrecking ball and the id of the Republican Party. Every worst instinct of like American nativism and fascism. And here we are. So awesome video from Ben Norton. The Board of Peace is just the new UN, but it's rank imperialism and colonialism, and it's rolling the clock back. It's might makes right. It's law of the jungle. It's there are no rules, but whatever rules I create. And it's in that scenario that, we get hey, maybe we'll steal Greenland. Hey, maybe we'll bomb Colombia next. Maybe we'll bomb Mexico next. Maybe we'll create the tech Native America. But I don't know what good the tech native America will be when the entire world fucking abandons you and isolates you and drops the dollar and makes it so you're dealing with your own political crisis and a debt crisis and all these different problems. I mean, that's where we're headed. That's where we're heading because he had to overreach and he had to go full Mad King. And the fact that other Republicans don't notice it, the people in the cabinet don't notice it, I genuinely just find it hard to believe that these people could be this stupid. I know that they're dumb, and I know that they're cowboys, and I know that they're far right, but to not realize how self-destructive this is and how this is literally the end of the country at this point, it is mind-boggling. All right, y'all. That's the show, man. Thank y'all for listening. As always, you guys should do me a favor and subscribe and click that bell icon. You can support the show on Patreon. That link is below. You can support Crystal Kyle and Friends on Substack, and you can go sub to Corn's World. You see us live there every Monday night. All right, love you guys, and I'll talk to you soon, man. Peace. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.